People will not go into a home, start knocking down walls unless they've got an architect there who can design out what does the end house need to look like and what's the logical way in which to build it. It's exactly the same with technology as SAID. We need an enterprise architect who's going to be able to design out the long term. So as a business, we have a long-term strategy. The architect works alongside the business to really map out, okay, so what does this then look like long-term? We're here today and we want to get to this endpoint. What does the long-term strategy look like? There is no longer an IT specialist on it in its own right. There's business technologists, IT technologists who come together to work on the end solution.
This is CIONET TV. My name is Hendrik Deckers. I'm here today with Sharon, who is an IT executive who has held various IT leadership roles, including being the CIO at Heathrow and at the Card Factory, an IT director at JSK, even in the post office. A very warm welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Hendrik. Great to be here.
Sharon, you have a master's degree in law, an MBA from the Open University, and throughout your career you started in banking. You've held multiple positions on the verge of IT and business. So we'll talk about that more certainly in this conversation. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. Who are you really? What's your background and and what's the story of your career?
Well, thank you. So I actually did start my IT career in banking. I decided that I wanted a really clear career around technology, but mainly around how to help businesses. So my career for IT actually started with project management and trying to solve business problems. I then progressed my career through other organizations like GSK. I spent almost 11 years at GSK, which was fantastic. And that's really where I developed my leadership style and my leadership training. I then went on, after I left GSK, one of the main reasons I left was because I wanted to become a CIO. And when you work for a very large organization and you grow your career up in a large organization, you can often be pigeonholed. Yep. So I wanted to spread my wings a bit. And so I left and I joined a software company and then developed out through there. So becoming a CIO for me was all about having the full spectrum and management of IT, but also to help and lead organizations. But along the way, because I didn't actually go straight to university from school, I actually did my training whilst working. So I developed an aptitude for business and did an MBA. And then I went on to do a Master of Law. And I specialized in forensic psychology, which is really, really random. But what that actually taught me was marrying business with technology and really understanding how people work with technology.
Okay. So Sharon, I want to start the conversation with talking about IT leadership. And you've held various roles as CIO and IT director and so on. So you have really a good view, I think, on how the role of IT leadership has evolved. And some people even say today that we are witnessing the end of IT leadership as we knew it. So what's your view on this?
That's a really interesting perspective about the end of IT leadership, because when I started my career, IT tended to be in the basement or in some godforsaken porter cabin in a site. And IT was really very much a support function. Yep. But now technology is really strategically enabling business growth. Yep. So CIOs and IT leaders in general need to really have very strong business acumen. So the focus has to be on outcome rather than technology. And outcomes could be around revenue growth or customer experience, or even leading on innovation. And that's where I see the role of CIO evolving.
Yeah. So every technology leader must be a business leader nowadays,
yes, absolutely.
Right? So in your view, the role of the CIO has dramatically changed over the last decade or decades. And so what does that really mean for technology leaders of today? What's the impact for the leaders themselves?
It's about getting some deep business understanding, and rather than driving the technology for technology's sake, but really driving understanding how technology can actually enable the business to, as I say, achieve commercial objectives or to build growth. One of the aspects I believe that CIOs need to have is the capabilities around strategic leadership. So always thinking long term rather than short term tactical, but also really understanding how the technology itself can actually enable the business. I can give an example of an organization I worked with quite a few years ago. I'll name them actually, Avon Cosmetics. Avon Cosmetics at the time was a door-to-door business model. So they would actually deliver their products through door-to-door representatives, 6.5 million globally. So it was a very, very large sales force. The problem was that a lot of the activity at the time was very manual. So the representatives would go door to door, fill in a form for the customer, collect all their forms at the end of the week, post them into the distribution center, who would then have to scan the OCR, scan them in, and then produce the order. So it could take up to 3 weeks between when the customer signed up and then when they actually got their products. And one of the innovations that I brought in was actually a Salesforce product, and it was enabling the representative rather than filling in forms and sending them in. And that's just an idea, I think, for technologists to really have what is the business process that we're trying to improve, and then where can either innovative technology or existing technology help improve.
So I mean, the typical CIO used to be a civil engineer who started as a programmer and knew everything about all the different stacks and the networks and the operating system and applications. But you've got a background in law and so on, so you have a different background. And we see more and more people with business background in IT leadership roles. So what are really, you think, the real skills that CIOs of today need, and what kind of mindset shift have we seen with IT leadership today?
So for me, it is around being really clear about the business that we're in. So when I sit around the table with my peers, I sit as a business colleague, not as a technology colleague. I'm always constantly looking for opportunities to improve whatever is working or not working today. And so the capabilities I think that CIOs really need to exhibit is that, as I say, the strategic mindset. So being really clear long term, where is the business heading? And then be able to collaborate very closely with the peers to really understand what are the pain points that are currently existing with us being able to achieve our strategic aims.
Now, IT leaders need to become more and more business leaders, but business leaders need to become more and more IT savvy as well. So how do you see the role of the CIO in helping the business colleagues to become more IT savvy?
It's a coaching role. So generally, I used to remember sitting in boardrooms and the AV equipment would go down and everyone would look at me and say, Sharon,
that's your job.
That's your job. It's not working. But the reality is all business leaders now have to become technologists. And the role of the CIO is to orchestrate that transition with the peers. And the way I've done it is by educating my peers around what's coming down the line. AI was a really great example of this, where in the probably 5-6 years ago, I was educating my exec colleagues around this is coming and these are the things we need to start thinking about. So it's the education role, I think, that the CIOs need to have.
Okay. Now, we've seen a number of very important trends. And so we'll discuss a couple of them in this conversation. The first one that we see is that IT has really become an enabler for the business, right? And so it used to be the IT was the controlling department, and now it really needs to be the empowering department. And with cloud and AI and automation tools and low-code, no-code tools and so on, the business functions increasingly are able to drive their own digital initiatives, right? So how do you see the role of IT shifting in that context, and how does it really is able to enable and to support the business function while at the same time ensuring governance?
Yeah, the interesting thing about having businesses run IT initiatives for themselves is you get into this argument around shadow IT and things that need to be controlled in IT and things the business just need to be accepting of. Yeah. That's changing with the onset of AI and the tooling that AI tools like Copilot is enabling business to be able to do. So I definitely see the role of IT and IT technologies to help educate the business on the governance that sits around how they use it. So I'm a firm believer of guardrails. You know, people can act how they want without guardrails. And it becomes the Wild West. You put guardrails in place, people understand the rules, they understand the risks, and they understand how the tools work. It's much easier to control. So my aspect has always been building what I call fusion teams. So technologists sitting alongside business colleagues and together co-creating the solution.
So what you're saying, we need clear guidelines, communicate them. What can you do with cloud tools? What can you do with AI tools? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? How can we collaborate together on this?
Yes, especially because it's got to be secure. It's got to be secure by design, and that's where IT can help lead.
Sharon, maybe could you illustrate that a little bit? I mean, AI governance is a hot topic nowadays. How do you see what are for you best practices or good guidelines in keeping the governance of IT under control?
So a lot of the conversation around AI and controls of AI has been focused a lot on policy. That's why I hear a lot of organizations talk about we need an AI policy. The reality is we need to have the whole of the business really understanding the opportunities that AI can present and the best way, the safest way to actually utilize those tools. So governance for me is a really great framework to enable businesses to do that. And the way I've done it in the past is by creating, and it sounds pretty grand, but governance AI boards that actually are representatives from across the business that actually put their use cases into the mix to say, this is the things we want to be able to do. How do we do it? And together, the organization collaborates on doing it.
Yeah. A second major trend that we see in IT leadership and IT in general is that we have moved very much into an agile and continuous delivery model. So it used to be that we had long-term roadmaps, long-term projects, and now we're really about agile and rapid innovation. So how do you, in your view, how can we balance long-term IT strategy with the need for continuous and continuous delivery and agility?
We absolutely need road mapping. I'm a firm believer on enterprise architecture road mapping. I always use the analogy of house building. You know, people will not go into a home, start knocking down walls unless they've got an architect there who can design out what does the end house need to look like and what's the logical way in which to build it. It's exactly the same with technology estate. We need an enterprise architect who's going to be able to design out the long term. So as a business, we have a long-term strategy. The architect works alongside the business to really map out, okay, so what does this then look like long term? We're here today and we want to get to this end point. What does the long-term strategy look like? The agile development and the continuous improvement is the iterative developments in between this is the long-term view. This is where we want to get to. And the iterative aspects are around the fact that you can start small, but you're able to scale fast because you know exactly where you're going. Without that long-term picture, you'll literally be zigzagging across your estate, not really understanding what the end game is going to look like.
What in your view are the biggest challenges for organizations to become more and more agile and to have agile development of their systems?
It's the breaking down of silos. I'm a firm believer that we talked earlier about the role of the CIO, you know, is it the end of the role of the CIO? It's the end of the way IT was previously perceived. So no longer do business colleagues decide what they want to do and then chuck it over the fence into IT to go away into a corner, build something and then try and chuck it back. It's about collaborating and working together. So I'm really a big believer of now having what I call fusion teams. There is no longer an IT specialist on it in its own right. There's business technologists, IT technologists who come together to work on the end solution.
Yeah. Now, a very important part of becoming really agile and continuous delivery is to have a really good data framework, let's say, to have your data under control and to become data driven as an organization. What's your experience in that? What's the role that data plays in enabling this fast and iterative decision making that we need in organizations?
The problem I think a lot of organizations have isn't that they don't have enough data. It's quite often they have too much data without any real controls or any tools to actually mine the data and get insights out of it. So the key aspects that organizations really need to start to understand is who owns the data, who's going to be responsible for the quality of that data. Because the key challenge that I found, and I found this in an organization I'd worked with recently, whereby the categorization of data means different things depending on which department you're working with. So as an example, the definition of a sale will mean different things in the customer service function, to the sales function, to the marketing function. You have to get to a definition that everyone's agreeing. So you call sales, and everyone knows exactly how that is calculated. You call customer, and everyone knows what the definition of customers are, employees, whatever the categorization of the data sets, you need to get to a point where it's owned by one person owns, or one function owns that categorization, and then everyone else uses that same categorization.
Now I used to work in a software company where we did data warehousing projects 25 years ago. So why is this still today a problem? I mean, we've been working on this for decades to organize our data and so why is this not solved yet?
Because I think people want to own their bit of the data. There's an aspect now where no matter what system you put in, so you could put in a HR system, and functions, rather than use the system as the main source of data for employees, will extract the data, put it into spreadsheets or PowerPoint presentations, and that will be how they manage their data set for employees. What organizations really need to get to understand is the data ownership has to be really clear, and the accountability of who owns data has to be clear. HR should own employee data. End of story. No matter where the employee is recruited, it should be owned by HR. Financial data should be owned by finance.
And still that's not the case in every company. I mean,
it isn't.
Sometimes you have a data department and they're still considered the owner of all the data. You don't believe in that model then?
No, I believe the data should be owned closest to where it needs to be generated and consumed. So as I said, financial data should be owned by finance, because that's how you're measuring the success of the organization. You're measuring growth. If you start to use different measurements for what constitutes a sale, what constitutes commission, it becomes very diluted. And that's, to your point, we've been grappling with this for years. Companies really need to step back and stop feeling like each department needs to own their slice of the data.
So it's not a technology problem. It's an organizational, it's a governance issue that we need to solve by putting the ownership where it's due. And also make sure that they really take the ownership and that they realize the importance and the value of that data, because I think that has to be done, that IT needs to sometimes still instruct or coach or learn the business departments that they need to own it and they are the owner and they need to manage it.
Yes. So where I see IT playing a role is in the centralizing of governance and policy and frameworks that enable the business to use it. But the governance processes and the governance forums that need to exist is by really being clear across the organization who owns this slice of the data, and every system, so from an architecture perspective, knows what the single source of truth is, and they extract the data from that. But the data is actually generated in one place, but utilized in many.
Now, we don't organize data just for the fun of it. We do it to extract value out of it and create better customer experiences and so on. So for that, we need business analysts, we need data scientists and so on. Where do you, in your view, what is the best way for organizations to organize their data science departments? Do you see like this needs to be a central role somewhere under IT or under a CDO? What is the best way to set that up to empower the business departments? Do they need to own it themselves? I mean, there's different models possible there, right?
There's many models, and there is a multiple ways of what I call skinning the cat on this. There is no one size fits all. So more or less any model will work as long as everyone understands how to make it work. So for centralized versus decentralized, hub and spoke method versus, as I say, versus centralized, the key aspect really is everyone really understands how it is structured. So in my mind, one of the key aspects around a CDO versus, IT running and owning the data is understanding what the rules of engagement are going to be between the two functions. And where it always falls down is when the CDO wants to create his own domain and wants to keep everyone else out, rather than the collaboration with IT, because IT will always own the platforms and the wires and links between each of the systems. But who owns the governance? Who owns the data science capability, the engineering capability? It will start to devolve within businesses as well.
So what's your view on, I mean, we have CIOs, we have CTOs, we have chief digital officers, we have chief data officers. What's your view on this? Is this all the same thing in the end, or does it make sense? When does it make sense to split up the different roles?
The CIO role, or the technologist role, is probably the only role on the exec that has so much dilution. You don't have it with finance, so you always have a CFO. You don't have all these different pockets of finance people across the exec. The reason I think the IT role has been split so much is because the movement between IT being a support function and IT being a driver of growth and an enabler of business growth, is that the strategic angle has now moved much more to be technology enabled. So businesses now cannot survive without technology. And there is still a mindset shift in a lot of C-suite execs to say, well, I want to own that. It's not an IT thing. It's not a technology thing. It's something that I need to own as a business. So the CTO role, which is all about the technology and the wires and the platforms and the enterprise architect, that exists because it's very much technology driven. The CIO role is such a hybrid role because it has to be a business enabling role, but then it's stepping on other people's toes. It's telling the CFO, how to run finance. It's telling the chief strategy officer how to deliver and enable strategy. It's telling HR how to run people systems. So it's such a mixed role. It's whether or not the role will exist in its current function or whether every single C-suite will become a technologist.
So the end of the CIO role has been a CIO role. So the end of the CIO role has been announced many times already in history, right? So I think we'll still will be around for quite some time, though.
I think it will be around for a long time, yes.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, we talked about a trend being from long roadmaps that we still need. We still need the long-term vision, but we're now really in an era where we have continuous agile delivery of value and of systems and so on. Let's talk about the role that organizations then give to their technology partners, to their vendors and their sourcing vendors and so on. So what is your view on how has the relationship changed with vendors 10 years ago and nowadays? And what's the best way to collaborate with them in this agile continuous delivery mode?
So there is a pendulum swing. Over the many decades that I've worked across industries, there's an insource versus outsource, and it just keeps swinging backwards and forwards. Yeah. And there is almost a fashion to insource, and then it's suddenly out of fashion and everyone's moving to outsourcing. The challenge organizations absolutely need to grapple with is, what are the core capabilities that need to be developed internally? And those capabilities are going to be the aspects that give a competitive advantage to the organization. So a good example of this is a few years ago, I worked for an organization that was literally heavily outsourcing everything. The problem with it was we had lost control of costs. And so there was this aspect around very little visibility on costs, very little visibility on where improvements could be made. Because when you outsource quite a lot and you outsource capability, it's not in vendors' interest to then make you a lot more productive and more efficient unless they're financially incentivized to do so. And let's be honest, that's the reality. It's a commercial relationship. So organizations themselves, before they think one way or the other, insource versus outsource, is really be clear, what are the capabilities we want to build internally, and where's those capabilities best set? But the key is having the right level of technology leadership that can direct either the teams that they're building internally or the outsourced partner. But in order to help organizations build and accelerate innovation quickly, it can't always be done internally. So there is a need to use external partners for certain innovations.
One of the partners that you've worked with in your career is Fujitsu.
Yes.
And you're on the advisory board of Fujitsu as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience that you have with this organization?
So Fujitsu is a very well-established organization, has worked across many, many industries. And I've worked with Fujitsu in both public sector and private sector. And the benefits, I believe, of working with an organization like Fujitsu, and certainly my experience with Fujitsu, is that innovation. Fujitsu want to really understand how an organization works. And with that understanding, the wealth of the back end of the organization can tap into capabilities that don't exist in the organizations that are working. So for me, it's a give and take relationship of, we have this set of problems, almost providing a case study of a problem, a use case of a problem. How can you help us solve this problem?
So that can also help you think on a strategic level and not only give you the bodies that you need to implement projects.
Absolutely. And the way technology is moving so fast, there's no possible way an internal organization with a fixed team can keep up with that fast innovation.
Sharon, a third trend that I want to talk about is the IT has become more, or should become more and more human-centric, and is becoming more and more. And we human-centric, and we've moved from IT providing standard platforms, the same thing for everybody, to more and more personalization in the technology. And so with automation and with AI and so on, this really allows companies to leverage these technologies to create a better employee experience and to create, therefore, a better customer experience. So what's your view on that? Where do you see the trends in that front?
So all businesses are really keen on adopting better ways of working. I've never worked for an organization who says, no, you can't improve what we do here. So I get that a lot of organizations want to improve, want to get employee productivity, want to improve customer experience, want to do innovative changes with the way their current processes are working. The challenge is always going to be around making sure that organizations really have technologists, not just in IT, but within the organizations themselves. I think companies need to have or adopt what I call a growth mindset, rather than this is the way, fixed mindset, this is the way we always do things here. Growth mindset for me is really reframing the problems that the companies are looking at, and then thinking about what are the best ways of being able to improve this. And the only way to do that is to get a diverse set of thinking around the table. So business technologists, but also people who have deep business understanding, business acumen, commercial acumen, and then get the technologists in the room. So you almost frame the problem together and then be able to come up with a solution.
How do you look at the impact that the Geminis and the ChatGPTs and the Copilots have on productivity of our people nowadays?
Companies are blindsided if they feel that their employees are not using ChatGPT and any of these other AI tools outside of the work environment. The problem is that we need to be able to have the guardrails in place to ensure that people aren't publishing very sensitive data. So really understanding how do you control it within the ecosystem of the organization. It does absolutely help organizations with productivity improvements, getting answers very quickly. But in order to be able to do that, the data sets that is being utilized have to be governed. So there has to be some controls around where the data sits, who gets access to the data, and then how do you actually then publish that data into these lovely tools.
Now, at the same time, there's first reports coming out that, I mean, there's a natural resistance to change in people in general, right? So some reports are saying that the adoption rates of these new tools are not necessarily that big, and they're not for free. They can cost a lot of money. So some companies even don't offer these new tools to everybody because they want to roll it out phase by phase. What's your view on that? How can we make sure that these amazing tools that are out there are really used and that people are taking advantage of it and not just collecting dust on their laptops?
Yeah, I guess for me, and I've seen this firsthand, people need to develop curiosity. They need to be able to develop the continuous improvement gene, as I call it, rather than sticking with what they know. Yep. And one of the biggest resistance to change that I always find in organizations is the reason it is so hard is because people don't want to change because they think either it's going to disrupt what they currently do and they don't want the disruption, or it's going to create more work for them. There is always going to be this hump, this learning curve of it's going to be hard until you get to understand how it becomes a benefit. I mean, we can all think back to when we first learned how to drive. It was one of the most unnatural things ever. The coordination, hand-eye coordination and movement is very, very difficult until it becomes second nature. No one who's been driving for many years gets in a car and have to think about it. It's the same with these tools. It's the first bit of the learning curve is hard, but organizations need to give people the leeway and the time to be able to go off and do and learn these tools. I'm a big advocate of not having 5 days a week back-to-back meetings for every hour of the week. I really like to encourage my teams, and one of the things I've always done with my teams is say you need to put aside at least half a day for learning and learn something new.
Half a day a week?
Half a day a week, at least, to learn something new, because that will bring benefits back into the functions. Yeah.
Let's bring out your crystal ball, Sharon, and let's talk a bit about the impact of AI on IT itself. Yeah. Because I mean, all these new tools will really increase productivity for everybody in the business. But I think especially within AI, for everything that has to do with operations, everything that has to do with code development, with quality control of code, with migration of code, I think the impact is going to be massive with the agents and so on. So where do you see, how do you see the IT department itself changing dramatically over the next 5-10 years with these tools?
Yeah, the skill sets are going to be very, very different. In my mind, one of the biggest aspects around the changes is that we're no longer going to need standard skills like project management or business analysis. The tools will be able to help do a lot of that analysis and thinking. The other aspect is the development of code itself. Again, with AI, it's going to start to build the codes for us and be able to, the machine learning, it'll get better and better, much faster.
It sounds scary, right?
It does sound scary, but the benefits a human brings to all of this is the thinking, the association, the application of the tools to be able to do that. So I see the role of IT changing much more to be relationship building, a much higher EQ capability to be able to work and engage with stakeholders, to be able to collaborate much better with third parties, but also to build team capability as well around how to actually think and enable things to be done in a much better way.
Okay, super. So Sharon, let's talk a little bit more about your leadership and the roles that you've played and the experiences that you had. So would you mind sharing with us maybe some of the bigger digital transformation programs that you've worked on and what you learned from them?
Yeah, digital transformation is actually an interesting term because in the IT world, we've always been doing digital transformation. And, you know, the definition in my view is all around how do you modernize a business using technology? And I've been doing that all my career. So it's quite a good aspect. Now, one of the biggest digital transformation programs that I worked on was around identity management when I was at the post office. And the post office have to manage quite a lot of different initiatives like banking, financial services, insurance, mortgages, as well as postage. And when a customer comes into the post office and they have to bring in their birth certificate, marriage certificate, death certificate, whatever the certificates are, it's a continuous need to be able to do it. So we looked at how can we create a post office identity that is going to be unique to that customer, but can be used across all post office services. The UK government don't have an identity card system. So it wasn't a case of, are we now trying to create a backdoor identity card system on behalf of the government? We had to be really careful about how we portrayed what this would actually benefit the customer with. And so a number of the business groups got together into a room and we had to look at what's the customer journey throughout a post office environment. So we looked at, you know, if someone was moving house, if someone was getting married, someone wanted to create a new business or whatever it was, what were all the journeys and what are all the touch points where they needed to prove their identity. And by getting together and really understanding it, we mapped out where are the pain points in these journeys, what are the systems we currently have back end that enable all these journeys to happen, and what could we actually improve to make sure that the journey was a lot more seamless. And being able to do that in a room with business colleagues, with the technology specialists, with the BAs, to map out those end-to-end processes was actually the blueprint I now use across all digital transformations, is really understanding the journeys that we're trying to improve, whether it's a customer, client, a passenger journey, whatever the journey, or an employee journey, understanding all the pain points that go with it, and then what systems currently support it and where potential opportunities are for improvement. Okay,
great. Now we talk about IT leadership. Let's talk a little bit about your leadership style. So how would you portray that? How would you define your own leadership style and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, I describe myself as a game changer. You know, whenever I'm talking to organizations about specifically IT and the role of the CIO, I always describe myself as a game-changing CIO. My purpose is really to help inspire businesses to adopt technology. With that, the teams that I build and the teams that I lead and the organizations I lead, I like to empower people. So I build teams that I'm able to empower, because you can't empower someone that you don't feel has the capability to do the work, because the guardrails you put in place, you've got to think, are they going to be able to work within those guardrails? How much empowerment do you enable someone to have?
Yeah.
So my team would always say, yeah, she's very good at empowering. There's a plus side and a minus side on that, because you empower chaos, you end up with, you lose control. But what I don't like doing is micromanaging. So that's definitely not within my repertoire. If I can empower my teams, give them clear vision around my game-changing vision, this is really where we're going. Yeah. This is what I want to inspire people to work towards. People generally are able to work within those remits.
If I would go back and talk to a number of people that worked with you, people that worked around you, what do you think they will say about you? The good, the bad, and the ugly. What is it that how do you think people really think about you?
Yeah, and it is mixed. I definitely know I'm not everyone's cup of tea. One of the things I am always consistent on is visioning and having a very clear strategic vision. So I always think long term. Yeah. And that's what people will always say about me. She has very clear long-term vision. The how to get there, I'm very clear on. These are the steps. This is where we are currently. This is where we need to be. And these are the steps that need to get there. The challenge I think I always portray is pace. I am the worst person to tread through treacle. I get very, very frustrated. And I think that's what people, on the downside, people say she gets very frustrated if things aren't moving progressing in the right way. Yeah. I like forward movement. I don't like backward stepping. I don't like going back over things that we've already agreed. I have to always be moving forward. So people will say that's what Sharon's like. She's always wanted to move forward. But then I can be intolerant. I think that's one of the ugly bits. I can be really intolerant. So my frustration will come out in, oh my goodness, I can't deal with this anymore.
We'll talk a little bit more about your personality in a moment.
Okay.
But let's talk a little bit about talent. I mean, to be able to be successful, be a successful IT leader, you have to be strong in building high-performance IT teams, right? So what's your secret ingredient? What's your secret sauce in creating and attracting the right people, creating teams and making them successful?
Well, I explained earlier that I feel I'm a game-changing CIO. I like to have, and most people, when they get up in the mornings, it's because they need to do something. So I firmly believe, and this is probably where my forensic psychology comes in terms of human behavior, people need purpose. From the times of our ancestors, whether it was going out foraging or, collecting wood, whatever it was, people need purpose. And I think for me, to build a team, it's really driving a team with purpose. And that's one of my secret sauce, my superpower is really building that purpose in people. But people also need to be developed as well. So training and development is a key aspect, and helping people through a mindset shift and cultural shift is really what I bring in. So I can walk into an organization that has been running for hundreds of years and people have been there forever and a day, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years in an organization, don't really want to change. And then I come in a bit like the Tasmanian devil and say, well, guys, this is a really great opportunity. These are things we could do. I have to paint that big picture. I have to enable people to envision what the future could look like and build that purpose and work alongside it. But clearly, one of the aspects is around people have to want to follow. People have to want to be led in that direction. If people want to go up in another direction, that's a different conversation. But if people are seeing the vision, thinking, yeah, actually, this can work. How are we going to get there, Sharon? These are the steps we need to take to get there. Are you with me? Yes. Okay, what do we need to do? And just constantly looking at, A, whether they're all with me on the journey, and B, making sure that everyone is understanding the purpose of what we're doing.
So, Sharon, you studied law and forensic psychology, and still you developed a career in IT, in technology. So explain me that a little bit. How does that all come together?
Yeah, so with IT and business, it has to fuse together. So the benefit of me studying forensic psychology and an MBA has really been around how do I build technology and business together and just lead with a business, with business acumen. The forensic psychology aspect is because I'm really interested in human behavior. I am a historian.
And the criminal part of
and the criminal parts, yes, yeah. Why people commit murders and why jurors convict or acquit. And it's that type of decision making of why people do the things they do, why they make the decisions they make. And in law specifically, you can only make a decision based on the information you have. And you have to, so this is where data-driven decision-making comes in business. And with a law, you have to be able to, whether you're convicting or you're acquitting, the data that you have, the information that you have, understanding people's behaviors, the nuances of what makes people tick, is the data that jurors and judges have to be able to make decisions.
So your passion is clear in technology, in business, in leadership as well. What are your passions outside of professional life?
Yes, outside of professional life, I'm not a big believer in sort of what they call work-life balance. Well, I say what people call work-life balance. I'm not a big believer in that. I just feel life is life. And life can be a mixture of what you do for work, what you do personally, what you do for hobbies. For me, it's about prioritization. So when I'm at work, I am at work, and I generally want to give it my full attention. When I'm at home, I want to be at home because I have my husband, we've got a dog, we've got wider family. So I want to be able to give it my wide attention. So I have to prioritize quite clearly. And I also have to set boundaries as well. I really don't like working over the weekend because that's family time. And again, when I'm at work, even if I'm working from home, I'm working in the office. I mean, my husband was very surprised quite a few years ago, but in fact, just before, just around COVID, when everyone was working from home. And, you know, I was more at home, obviously, clearly, than ever. And he would say, well, you know, can we just go out for lunch? And I'm working. I can't. It's, you know, 2.5 hours if I go out for lunch. But some days I could do it because didn't have huge amounts of working on, or I'd worked late the evening before. So I like to balance it out. But the boundaries and prioritization are key. My hobbies tend to be tennis. I absolutely love tennis. I used to play in competition when I was at school. So I absolutely loved that. And then in later life, I learned how to ski. Hadn't been a skier before. I certainly didn't do it as a child, but I learned it and became very, very good at it. So those are the two things that I absolutely love.
Okay. Now, you shared that you have a couple of kids in your family today. What are they, and what age are they?
So I have a blended family. So I have one boy. My husband has 3 boys, and so together we have 4 boys, and they're old.
Are they old?
Yeah. So the 2 oldest are 31, and then we've got a 26-year-old and a 23-year-old. Okay.
And what are the key values that you have passed on to your children? What are the key values that the core values that you live by yourself?
Yeah. So for me, the core values are all about how you show up in the world. And I'm a big believer, and my father gave us this this capability, and this value is around really ensuring that whatever you do to the best of your abilities. And I remember asking my dad when I was young, you know, what would you like me to be? What do you think I should be when I grow up? And he would always say, even if you're a road sweeper, be the best damn road sweeper there is. Don't ever give things your half effort. If someone is relying on you and they are paying you to do a job, do the best job that you can. So the values that we instill in our kids is, you know, working hard and working to the best of the ability, but also to have continuous learning and continuous improvements.
Okay. Sharon, you shared with us that your MBTI profile, your personality type, is that you're an ENTJ, also known as the commander. And so that's a personality type. It's extroverted, intuitive thinking and judging traits. And these are decisive people who love momentum and accomplishment. And they gather information to construct or creative visions, but rarely hesitate for long before acting upon them. So it's a typical leadership personality type, right? So we have quite a number of INTJs, ENTJs in our CIOs that we interview. And so the typical strengths for people with your profile is that they are efficient, they are energetic, self-confident, strong-willed, strategic thinkers, and charismatic and inspiring. Which out of these would you choose that really relate with you, and could you illustrate that a bit?
Yeah, I think clearly strategic thinking. Wherever I work or whatever I do in life, I always have to think strategically. What is the end goal, the outcome that I'm looking for in this role or in this organization? And that for me is a key trait. So yes, it really resonates with me, that description. Mm-hmm. The inspiring piece as well is key, because I clearly cannot achieve things on my own. I need a team behind me. I need an organization to have faith and trust in me that I'm going to be able to deliver. Yeah. So being able to paint the bigger picture, so have the strategic vision, but also to be able to inspire people to execute against it is key capabilities for me.
Now, every coin has two sides. Yes. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. So potential weaknesses for people with your profile is that they can be stubborn and dominant. They can be intolerant, impatient, arrogant sometimes, poor handling of emotions. They can be cold and ruthless. Now, you can't be all of these things, of course, but which ones resonates with you, and how have you overcome that? How do you cope with that development area, let's call it?
Yeah, I think actually, you see, you can't be all of them. I think all of them probably do show up in me on a bad day. On a bad day, I'll probably show much, apart from being ruthless. I don't think naturally I am ruthless, but I can be impatient, and I know this about myself, and I have to watch for it. And when I build a team, I always need someone who's completely the opposite. And I point out to them, these are my bad traits. Okay. You need to call me out on it if you see me exhibiting those. So I need a accountability buddy that's going to be able to call me out on these things. But yes, impatience is a big issue for me. I can show patience in certain things. I'm very patient when I talk to people, yeah, and when I'm trying to solve a problem. But progressing and moving forward and talking about a solution, yeah, drives me insane if we're just going over and over and over the same things. Yeah. I always feel that organizations, whenever they're trying, like, we were talking about strategy and digital transformation, and people want to get to real nuances on what does this mean for us as an organization. Mm-hmm. Let's just move forward. Let's just at least take the first step, test and learn, and move forward again. So I like iterative forward motion. So yes, the intolerance, impatience are real, I guess, bad traits for myself.
So Sharon, in your career, if you look back, who are the people that you really look up to? Who were the mentors in your life? Who were the important people that you learned from? And what was it that you learned?
Yeah, I've had a number of really great, inspiring mentors and leaders that I've worked for. One springs to mind, a guy I worked for at GlaxoSmithKline. He was the first leader that really believed in me. I had, certainly back then, had very little self-confidence. I wasn't that confident at all. I was always second-guessing myself. But he saw something in me. Yeah. And that actually taught me a really great lesson about leadership. Mm-hmm. If you see something in someone that they don't necessarily see in themselves, yeah, provide the environment that's going to enable them to flourish. Mm-hmm. And that's what he enabled me to do. He provided the guardrails around how I could make decisions, how he could make me a lot more autonomous and, yeah, and to be able to go off and do things in my own right. But he also provided the coaching skills to give me instant feedback around what he saw, what he observed. Yeah. And that actually helped me grow enormously. And that was the first big learning curve from me being a IT professional to being an IT leader, was that progression of being really clear around what are the things I'm doing right and where do I need to improve.
Yeah, leadership is something that we need to learn.
Yes.
But also, what I wanted to ask as well is, we all need to go to professional development, also to personal development, right? Are there any things that you could share about the personal development road that you have taken and that you have gone through?
Yeah, my MBTI profile is really around some of the plus points and negative points. I have to really focus in on what are the things that really make me me. I don't want to be showing up inauthentic. So I need to be able to have my natural style. Yep. But clearly there are things around me being impatient, me not being able to be tolerant in some aspects. Because I'm very much self-aware, and again, this is where forensic psychology comes into the mix, being really clear on human behavior and where the things that help me develop and also help to hold me back. Yep. If I know about it, I'm able to correct. And I spend a lot of time on self-development. So I read a lot of self-development books. I listen to quite a lot of podcasts as well.
Which are your favorite ones?
So my favorite, Simon Sinek is a big favorite of mine. But also on podcasts, I love The Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. I started listening to him literally at the beginning of shutdown in COVID. Yeah. And he actually helped me through a lot of the lonely times that COVID introduced and helped me understand a lot more about myself. And then it spun off into finding other avenues around. I'm a big believer in indigenous tribes as an example. So one of the aspects where my son actually introduced me to is the Native American plant medicine and the indigenous tribes in Peru and in Mexico. Uh-huh. And a lot of their teachings is really about getting back to nature and really getting connection with nature. Yeah. I'm very fortunate to live in an ancient woodland. So I now I diarize it actually throughout my day to go out for 15...
With the dog?
With the dog, 15, 20 minutes, just walking in the natural woodlands, being out in nature and being connected. That really grounds me.
That grounds you, puts your feet back on the ground.
Puts my feet very firmly on the ground. It makes me human.
Yeah. What's the one thing that people might be surprised to learn about you?
I think, although my profile is extroversion, I'm a natural introvert. Mm-hmm. As a child, I was painfully shy. Painfully shy, yes. I mean, if I think back now, yesterday I was up on stage in front of 400 very inspirational women giving a keynote speech. Mm-hmm. I could never have dreamt of doing that as a child. I literally could not open my mouth. I would sit in the corner. I'm one of 7 children, the middle child of 7. Mm-hmm. And with the noise around me, my voice was very quiet. So I think people would be surprised to know that about me, that I've had to learn to be an extrovert.
Okay, super. If you look back at your career, professional-wise, you've built great success, but we all make our failures, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's from our failures that we learn. And so would you care to share maybe one of your most brilliant failures that you have experienced and what you learned from it? Yeah,
the biggest failure, and it's, because of the way I've built my career, is all about change. So I was leading a very large business transformation program, and, I'm a forward motion person, as we've established. So moving forward with this transformation program, having a team behind me that needed to progress on the transformation, I missed a key critical business change that we couldn't implement. And this was some years ago, and it was actually it happened in Turkey. And we went live with this system, and complete disaster. We literally could not trade when the system went live. And it was because I rushed through, specifically the user acceptance testing. The program had been running for 2 years prior to us going live. And I felt we were ready. I basically, even though we'd cut testing down to a very bare minimum, I pushed ahead with it and said, look, we published that we're going live on this day. We have to go. Yeah. And that's my stubbornness coming out. And we went.
What did you learn?
I learned that I have to listen to others, and it cannot just be my decision to do something so significant. Even if I am the leader, if there is a lot of noise around me, I have to listen to that noise. That was the first lesson. The second lesson is test, and test the hell out of something. So if your timelines are being squeezed and you don't sacrifice the testing window, you just have to extend the deadline. That was a big lesson.
Okay, if we go back to your personal life, what was one of the best things that has ever happened to you?
My personal life, well, personally, meeting my husband and getting married with him, he's a phenomenal man. He's been extremely supportive of me. He really supports my career. He's semi-retired now, so he just lets me lead and do what I want to do in my career aspect. Career-wise, I think my biggest challenge was always learning. I've never been a great person academically. So I left school with just basic high school qualifications after high school, and I left and went straight into work. Oh. But as I was working, I realized a lot of my peers, a lot of my directors had degrees and I didn't have a degree. And that's how I got into learning and development and actually starting to build out my academic studies. So getting my degrees and my masters was phenomenal. It was a complete achievement because I did it while I was working. But I prioritized and I put my, put my boundaries up, and I knew I was studying at the weekend and I was working during the week, and I was able to get through my studies over many years, but I was able to do it then.
Okay. And what are maybe some of the worst thing, or what was the worst thing that ever happened to you, and what did you learn from that?
The worst thing for me is always when it comes to people. It's always people related. The worst thing that happened to me was when I had to make quite a lot of people redundant. I think one of the challenges of leadership is having to make really tough business decisions, especially when it involves people. And the worst thing that happened to me was when I had to make a lot of people redundant in a very short period of time. And you're going through a process of deciding what's the framework for how you decide who stays and who goes. And everyone knows it's happening. People are talking in corridors. So you feel you've got this weight of expectation around you. Yeah. And people have families, and people have been in organizations a long time, and people have invested their efforts into an organization. And you're literally pulling the rug from under their feet. And it weighs extremely heavily on me.
I can imagine. If you would not have had a career in technology, what career do you think you would have had?
Oh, property development, architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love buildings. I love creating safe spaces for people. When I was growing up as a child, my parents, who came from Barbados to the UK, they met, married here, and ended up having 7 children. And as I said, I'm in the middle of 7. But there was one point where in my mum and dad's early life, so when they had 2 young children, they became homeless, and they had to try and find a home for us. And my mum always recounts walking the streets, knocking on people's doors, trying to find out whether there was any space for her and her kids and her husband. And it always resonated with me as a child, listening to those stories, that humans need safe spaces. They need a roof over their heads, a safe place to sleep at night. So I work very much with homeless charities as well. So I do that as well in my free time. But I love building buildings. I hate seeing derelict buildings. I always think I could really transform that. So that would be my career, is really looking at how to build homes for people who won't necessarily be able to afford it, and take over derelict buildings and convert them into safe spaces for people.
That could be a next career.
That could be a next career. Yes, it's never too late.
So you not become a property developer or an architect or building homes. You started in IT, but how did I really start? Where was the sparkle that ignited your career?
Yeah, I like most CIOs in my sort of age range, didn't naturally go into IT as a career, fell into it. And that's exactly what happened to me. I fell into IT completely by accident. I was working in a bank in admin, and there was a problem with the computer system at the time, and the IT support organization that we brought in to try and fix it couldn't fix it, and it was going on for many months. It ended up being a networking problem, but they couldn't fix it. I then went out and bought a book. It was before the days of Google, so I went out and bought a book and worked my way through how to solve this problem. Wow. Because I couldn't sit with we couldn't print. Okay. So I was able to solve the problem, and my bosses at the time said, "You're wasted in admin. Have you thought of a career in IT?" And they sponsored me to train to become a certified network engineer. And that's how I got into IT. And I worked in the banks. I worked at the Bank of England. Then I ended up in GSK, and then my IT leadership skills developed off the back of that. But as I said, completely by accident, never really planned to be in IT.
Okay, super. Sharon, thank you so much for your time and for the brilliant conversation of today. I want to finish with the last question. And these interviews, they're watched also by young professionals that want to develop in their own career, that want to be an IT leader, that want to be a CIO. What's the advice that you would give to these people?
Yeah, IT certainly changed from the time I started in IT, which was very technical. The hardware, the physical devices. IT now is much more business focused. So IT professionals need to have a much stronger business acumen. Yeah. I would advise anyone young coming up through their career, two things: understand how businesses work. That's the first thing. And the second thing is develop skills in prompt engineering. So AI is going to be a big aspect. Mm-hmm. Prompt engineering, cybersecurity, because you need to keep the data safe. You need to keep the actors out of your systems. And then the third thing is around cloud computing. Those would be the three aspects. And if I had young children today, and they wanted to be in IT, that's where I'd be pushing them, in one of those three aspects. Okay. Thank you. It was a great pleasure, Hendrik. Thank you.
Thank you.